Hello everybody and welcome back to another F1 Roundup brought to you by the brilliant Seedream Formula One app. More on that in a moment. First of all, we've got to start by saying massive congratulations to Red Bull Racing and of course to Max Verstappen for becoming world champions. There is never an easy way to win a world title. It just doesn't happen that way. It's an indescribably difficult thing to achieve. And yet Max and Red Bull have now done that consistently over the last 4 years. It's something that we should all have respect for. You can look at it and say, well, Max had a dominant car in the early part of the season. Yes, he did. And that's exactly why they've won the championship, because as a team, they created a dominant car when others weren't able to. Only later in the season did we see the championship really come alive and swing back into the favour of others, perhaps, when others were able to do a job with their cars that brought them back into contention. But it was Red Bull that did the better job straight out the blocks, that hit the ground running. And it was that early advantage which in the end has made the biggest difference, and capitalising upon it, making hay while the sun shines, if you like, has really helped them to win this championship. This is how you win championships. It's about exploiting every single advantage that you can. And by creating the best car in Formula One, that gives you the advantage. It's a team sport. No driver, I said this recently in a post you may have seen, no driver has ever won a world championship on their own. They can only do that with the help and support of a wonderful team of people. And Red Bull have done this now consistently. They know how to win. They know how to do it year on year. This year has been a different way of winning because they've had to come up against real fight at different stages of the season. They haven't had the fastest car for large parts of that season. And so they've had to draw on different strengths. I think we can say Max has become a much more mature driver as a result of perhaps some of the, first of all, his experience, of course, now, but also some of the challenges he's faced this year. He's been a lot calmer. He's been a more measured driver than we would have seen earlier in his career. He's had to do that in races where he didn't have the car underneath him to win. And as a result of that, he had to bring out different elements of his game to maximise whatever available points were on offer that particular day. And he's done that. And he's done it over and over again. And, you know, we rarely see mistakes from Max Verstappen. That's the measure of the kind of champion that he is. That's just how good he is. The very best world champions. We can say the same from Lewis Hamilton over his peak years of winning consistently. Rarely made errors. And it's those guys that ultimately do the better job and deserve to be champion, and it's no different from Max today. So congratulations to him and the entire team. I know how that feels. It's the most amazing feeling in the world. And although this championship and Formula One as a whole at times can get a bit spicy between different sets of fans, it's become almost football-esque at times in terms of how some fans are quite vociferous towards others. Even bringing the media into this whole thing about bias and all this stuff that happens off track. And I understand, and I'm actually a real big supporter of the passion that's behind all of this now. But as you saw from the two drivers involved, from the two teams involved, the moment it's done, we have to take our hats off and give respect to the winner, give respect to all the competitors, in fact, because Lando has also done an amazing job. He said himself that him and the team weren't ready for this. Let's not forget, he hadn't even won a race up until this year. So this has been an incredibly steep learning curve. And if you look back at all of the sort of cycles of serial winning over the years, you could look at Red Bull, you could look at Mercedes, you could look at Ferrari before that. You know, every team that's done this period of sustained winning had to go through a period of learning before that where they didn't win. They got close on occasions and then finally they tipped over the edge and they got into this run of winning consistently and winning championships. And that's kind of exactly where McLaren are right now. Things are really positive at McLaren. Nobody should be too disheartened by this year's result. They've been learning how to operate at the front. Now they know. This experience has been massively valuable, and I'm very excited, as they are at the team, for 2025 and beyond, because the building blocks are in place. The foundations are solid. Now they can go ahead and build what they hope will be a consistently winning team. And if they can come out the blocks firing on all cylinders, as Red Bull did at the start of this year, well, then next year's championship should be a proper good one that no one wants to miss. Can't wait for that. So congratulations to Max and Red Bull. Right, this video is brought to you by Seedream. Seedream is an app that some friends and I got together and created because we felt there wasn't an app that was what we thought was the perfect app for Formula One fans. You often have to search in lots of different places around the internet for different versions of a story or different stories around the same topic, different formats of that story, whether you want video, whether you want written articles, whether you want podcasts or social media feeds. Seedream puts all of that centered around one topic. So when there's a breaking news article, it brings in all of those different things, all the different formats into one easy place. So it's gravitating around the news story or the breaking news or whatever the topic is. You no longer have to go to YouTube for this, to a podcast platform for this, to your social media for this. It's all in one place on the Seedream app. I hope you will love it, as I do and my friends that helped me create it do. We are very proud of it. It's totally free, and I would love you to go and check it out. The link will be in the description of this video, or you can just search the word Seedream wherever you get your apps from. Right, let's talk about the Vegas Grand Prix, because this was a race which was really a sort of special set of conditions. Not only is it a street track, but very fast as a street track, a little bit Baku-esque to some extent. But I think the biggest factor here is literally the temperatures. The race happens late at night, 10 o'clock on a Saturday evening. I was there last year, very much the same. Warm in the day, temperatures really fall away into the evening. And you should never underestimate how impactful ambient and track temperatures are on the way these cars perform. The whole story of Formula One in this modern era is about getting your tyres into the right temperature window in which they generate a massive amount of grip. And that grip you need to generate lap time. If you're just outside of that window or right on the edge of that window, your grip levels and therefore your performance and lap time fluctuates massively. And that's the other thing with cooler temperatures like we had in Vegas today, is that you have to be really aware of graining. Now, graining is this phenomenon where the surface of the tyre heats up at a massively faster rate because you're pushing than the core temperature or the bulk temperature of the tyre does. And when you get this big discrepancy between the surface layer of the rubber and the rest of the tyre, what happens is, and you've all seen the demonstration where you drag a pencil eraser across a desk, you get these little balls. The surface heats up really quickly and detaches itself into sort of almost molten balls, wears away or rolls itself off the surface of the tyre. That, of course, reduces grip. And when you reduce grip, the car starts to slide, and it exacerbates that very phenomenon. You overheat the surface of the tyre, much more so than the bulk of the tyre. You get more graining. It's a real problem in cooler temperatures because the temperature differential between bulk and surface temperature is so great. Now, George Russell, his challenge today, getting away from pole position, was to push and build a gap without introducing that graining phase. And he did that perfectly in that first phase. If you look at it, of course, it's easier to do from the front. You're not having the dirty air of a car in front of you. But of course, you do have a chasing pack. What he did very well was manage those tyres while still building enough of a gap to break DRS. Behind him, it was a different story, wasn't it? Because Charles Leclerc and the Ferraris, pushing like crazy to try and catch up and overtake, I think introduced a bit of graining, and that's really what hampered their first stints. But looking at George Russell, he kind of just drove a perfect race from start to finish, got a really good start, then controlled it all the way through. So hats off to George. Yes, the conditions, the cooler temperatures definitely help Mercedes. Their car works better in those kind of conditions. Fast flowing racetrack as well. Everything was geared up towards suiting them. But in these cooler temperatures, it was the Mercedes that made it work best of all. And I think that is something that Mercedes had to take advantage of on a day like today. They haven't had a consistently fast car. They're going into two races now at the end of the season, much more likely to be warmer temperatures. They may well struggle with those. But on the day when it did come to them, like they've done at other occasions during the season, they took advantage of it very, very well. So really great job from George Russell and also from Lewis Hamilton, who had that same very fast car and was able to really make use of that driving through the field. So it was a dominant day for Mercedes, and we haven't really been able to say that very often, have we? Both drivers doing an excellent, excellent job. At Ferrari, a slightly different story. I actually thought Ferrari might be the dominant team this weekend. It's a circuit they were strong at last year. It feels like it was a circuit that should suit their car, and they were quick. But I think that first phase where they got the graining, particularly on Charles Leclerc's car, hampered them. I think George doing such a good job in the Mercedes just meant they weren't really in the same ballpark as them. And because they weren't leading from the front, they didn't have that same ability to control the race like George did. So I suspect Ferrari did about as good a job as they could, coming in third and fourth. And whilst it was a really good day for them on that front, in the championship, the Constructors' Championship, I think they would have been hoping for a slightly larger gap over McLaren at the end of the day. Whilst they extended or closed down that gap rather to McLaren, I think really deep down they would have hoped they could have done that a little bit more. But either way, I think they maxed out what they could. Definitely some issues between drivers today. If you've heard Charles Leclerc's radio at the end of the race, he was not happy. It definitely wasn't broadcastable radio, I can tell you that. But he really wasn't happy about the fact that he feels like he's played being a kind of kind driver, doing his bit for the team on many occasions this year. And he feels like that hasn't been reciprocated on the other side of the garage, perhaps from Carlos Sainz. Carlos was told not to overtake when Charles was coming out the pits today, and then he did do that. It's difficult to just take that without the context that we don't have around the different pace of both cars, what the drivers were feeling, how the temperatures were particularly in Charles' car coming out the pits, as opposed to Carlos, who was already on track with proper up to speed tyres on his car. So it's easy to look at it and say, well, if you're told not to overtake, don't. But it's not that straightforward. I think, though, Charles, when he was in the car with adrenaline, not having the full big picture, vented quite publicly in a pretty brutal way. The team won't be happy with that, and I'm sure they'll sort it out afterwards with a private conversation. But a little bit of unrest, I think, born out of frustration, really, for Charles Leclerc. Probably a bit frustrated, actually, that he didn't do a better job in the first stint and manage his tyres a little bit better, and that probably cost him. Either way, a decent day, I think, for Ferrari. They are going to potentially struggle a little bit more in the final two races in a battle with McLaren, because the last two rounds, I should think it'll be close, but they might well favour McLaren a little bit more than this one did. This was always going to be a race that McLaren were likely to struggle at, because for all the reasons that Ferrari worked very well, McLaren didn't. I think McLaren didn't enjoy the temperatures. McLaren didn't enjoy the aero setup that they were almost forced to put on their car in the end, and it hampered them. And they just weren't able to generate tyre temperature and therefore grip, and that cost them not only in qualifying but then all the way through the race when they were stuck in that sort of little messy battle, the middle bit of the race where you're sort of in turbulent air, particularly around a street track like that. They were never able to break free of that and really maximise what the car could do if they managed to get all that in the right window. So a difficult day for McLaren. As I said, not one to be too upset about in the grand scheme of the Drivers' World title, but in the Constructors' World Championship, I think they'd be fairly happy that they did minimise the damage limitation to Ferrari by finishing, in the two positions, kind of just behind Max. So I thought that was a sort of pretty much as expected performance from both Ferrari and McLaren on the whole, in terms of where they were likely to be around this racetrack. Maybe it's McLaren who come away from that slightly happier, realising that they didn't lose as much ground as they potentially could have done. What else should we talk about? Well, Red Bull, let's say, again, a decent job from Max, just did what he had to do today. And that's another sign of the maturity of a guy who's come a long way in his career. You wouldn't have seen that, I don't think, in the early phase of Max's career. He was so desperate to win at all costs. He would have been making bold and brave moves. He would have been fighting and scrapping for every single position. Whereas today, he didn't need to do that. He did what he needed to do, and he did it well. So good job from him. On the other side of the garage, and we've said it all the way through the season, not good enough from Checo. And Red Bull will look at this constructors' battle, which is going to the wire. It's almost certainly not going to go to the wire and include Red Bull Racing in that. And the only reason that will have happened is because of the poor results on Checo's side of the garage. If Checo was operating even anywhere near Max's level, having already won a Drivers' World title, they would have already won the Constructors' World title too. And they should be doing that. Whoever's in that second car should be doing that every single week in, week out. I cannot see a world in which Red Bull continue to run Checo Perez in that second car. I appreciate there are contracts in place and there's lots of commercial aspects and complications to it, but from a pure sporting perspective, which is at the heart of everything in Formula One, it should be at least, they have to have someone who can do a better job. He's had more than enough chances. And whilst I love the guy to bits, I think he's a great person, a great guy, and he is still a great racer at times, he just cannot get the best out of these cars in this modern era of Formula One, certainly not out of that Red Bull. So I suspect we are very, very likely, and I'd be amazed if we don't see a change of driver for the start of next year. And that would potentially bring Red Bull Racing back into this contention, which we could see having four teams in the mix going into 25. Regulations stay the same. The cars are pretty much the same going from here into next year, ahead of the major change in 26, which everyone will have more than half an eye on all the way through next season, which means the performance that we've got right now, to some extent, will carry over. There's lots of refining and tweaking and things that people learn, but I think we're going to get a great battle next year. And what's wonderful about Formula One right now is, as this race showed, in a 24 race calendar, it swings across so many different circuit types, different conditions, whether it's night races, whether it's hot races, cold races, street circuits or permanent tracks, lots of different types of conditions and environments, which tend to swing the performance from one team to another. It's almost impossible to design a car that is dominant across all of those different variables. Typically what you'll do is either find one that works at most of the circuits if you've got a dominant type of circuit in your season, or at least get one that is very good, if not optimum, at across the whole range. You know, that's what you're looking for. It's very, very difficult to do. Look at Mercedes. Dominant today, no one was in the same ballpark, yet, you know, just a week ago, absolutely nowhere. So a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be a challenge in refining some of those details, but there's a lot of learning happened this year, and I think 2025 could be peak Formula One, and I cannot wait. I would love to know your thoughts. We've still got 2 races to go, of course, and there's a lot still to play for in that Constructors' World Championship. It is close, and I still think McLaren are in the box seat, not only because they have the points gap at the moment, but I think the last 2 races should come back to them as opposed to this one, which definitely went away from them. Let me know what you think on all of that. Please go and download the Seedream app. It's completely free and you will not regret it. The link is in the description of this video, and I will see you again very, very soon. Ta-ra.